Welcome back, everyone, to the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform. My name is AJay Raj, back with yet another lesson for you all in our eCore Express Java course. So this first official lesson of this course is going to be on a very important topic in this language, in this programming language. It's called variables in Java. We're going to take a look at the meaning and nature of variables in this unique coding language. So without further ado, I'm going to be switching over to our Eclipse workspace where we can see all of our notes and do some live practice. So now we're here on our Eclipse workspace. Anita walked you through how to set up your Eclipse workspaces. We're going to be putting all of our notes and our actual practice exercises as well. So I recommend that you create a project like Anita showed you. Create a project for eCore Express Java, the name of this course. And then underneath that, create a unit called Unit 2. And underneath that, you can create a class. This is our very first class. This is our first set of notes. It's going to be on variables, expressions, and statements. But for this lesson, we're going to be focusing specifically on variables. So as you can see here, we see a bunch of green text on the screen. All of the green text is basically called comments in Java programming. They don't register as actual code language. They're just written as general notes for yourself. So we're going to put all of our notes on Eclipse so it's live with our practice. So as you can see here, we're going to be diving into variables. So let's start with the very first type of variable, the simplest type. It's called an integer. It's abbreviated with 3 letters, int. A lot of things in Java are abbreviated from regular standard English names. So an integer, as you can expect, it's used to store integer values. So if you can think about any integer values like the number 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, it's essentially any number without any decimal points afterwards. So that can be 1 all the way to 100,000. It can store a very large amount of numbers. I won't go into the specific of the maximum capacity, but it can store very large integers and very small integers, going into negatives as well. So an integer, just make sure it's an integer value that you're storing in this variable. You can assign different values throughout the course of this program to this variable. It's called assigning a value. So when you think about a variable, it's almost like creating an empty file in your hard drive. You can put and drag and drop files into that hard drive, and those files will essentially be a number. You can drag and drop one number at a time. So a variable, an integer variable, can only hold one number at a time, but you can switch out what that number is throughout the course of the code. It has to have a name with significance. So you're always naming your variables. It can't be a keyword, so any of your standard coding words, it can't be, but you can create names for them. Say, for example, if you're trying to find out how many flower vases you need to buy, you can name the integer vases, and you can equal it to a certain value. So therefore, you know what the variable stands for. And also, lastly, like for any variable, not just integers, for all our variable types today, you're going to have to declare it at the top of the program before assigning a value. I'm going to show you what that looks like here. So let's take an example. Let's create a variable, and let's see if it actually stored in our variable type. So as you can see up here, this is called our variable declarations. So before you start any program, and if you have your variables already planned out, at the very top of the program, you're going to be declaring them. So we're going to take our integer. We're going to type in those 3 letters to say that we're creating an integer, and that's int, as you can see here in our comments. So now that just shows that we created an empty variable, an integer variable. So now what we have to do is right after that, we have to give it a name to give it significance. Let's name this number. That's a common name for just general number integers. So we're going to call this integer number. Now what we did was we officially created an empty variable called number. Now what we have to do is we're going to go into our code. This can be anywhere further along in our program. So let's go over here in our notes, near our notes, so it's more organized. Let's set that number variable. We're going to call it by its name. So number. Number officially stands for an empty variable, an empty integer variable. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set this integer variable equal to any integer that we want. Let's go ahead and set it equal to 7. That's an integer. And as you can see in any line of code that I'm programming, any line of actual code, I always end my statements with a semicolon. You're going to do that with any line of code in Java programming, just as you did up here with the declaration as well. So now that we set our integer, we declared our integer at the top, we made an empty integer called number, we set it equal to an integer value. Now we just want to go ahead and prove that it actually saved. The number 7 is actually saved in our variable number. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a special function called system.out.println. I just want you all to memorize this. Don't get too overwhelmed. This is just a common way. This is just a common function. It allows you to print anything out to your console. This console here is basically your output. It's what's the what's the result of your program code. This is just the computer responding to you. So all you're doing is you're taking information from your input, what you're actually typing in the program, and it'll just spew it out to your console, your computer. So what we're going to do is we're going to do system.out.println, put a semicolon at the end and put parentheses here. Just remember this exact syntax. We're going to put our actual variable inside of parentheses. Sorry, caps. We're going to put our actual variable inside of the parentheses. So we just put our variable number. What that's going to do is it's going to print out the value of number, the variable that we just assigned the value 7 to. It's going to print it out to our console. That's just to confirm that we stored the value 7 in this variable successfully. So what we're going to do is we have this function here. If you go to the top left corner, you see this big giant green play button. We're going to click on that. And as you can see here on our bottom console window, you can see that it printed out the value 7 to our computer. So that officially confirms that we did successfully store the number 7 in the variable number as an integer. So moving on to the next variable type, we have something called a double. So a double is very similar to an integer, except it's used to store floating point values as well. So what does that mean? It basically means that you can store decimals in a double. So you can use any amount of decimals after, like 3.1, that's one decimal point. You can use a very large amount of decimal values afterwards. I don't think you would run out of space with the double, but there is a maximum capacity. But we won't go into that in basic Java. But just know that you can store any amount of decimal values. Integers can also be stored as doubles. They do follow within the set guidelines of a double. So you can store any integers in a double without any decimal points, and also decimals in a double. But you cannot put a decimal in an integer value. That's the only thing you cannot do. So I'll show you an example of a double. It's the same process for all variables when it comes to declaring and then assigning them a value. So we're going to go at the top. We're going to use that keyword double. Remember, it's case sensitive, so type it in exactly like this. So let's create our variable, a double. We'll type in double, and we'll create, we'll just name it. So let's just say decimal, just for our note's sake. So we're going to name this double variable. We're going to call it a decimal. We're going to call it decimal. That's the name of the variable. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our code here, go back to our notes here, and we're just going to type in the name of the variable, our double that we created. It's going to be called decimal, and let's set it equal to a number. Let's set it equal to 7.1. It's a simple decimal. And yes, as I said before, you cannot store 7.1, which is a decimal, in an integer. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste our line of code here, the system.out.println, and we're going to print our variable decimal out to our console window just to confirm that we saved the right number in the right variable, to see if it's successfully saved. So we'll put in decimal inside parentheses, and we'll go back up and we'll hit that big green play button. And once we do, and once it has loaded, you can see on this last line right here, it did successfully store the value 7.1 in our variable decimal. It's a double type variable. All right, now onto our third variable type. And as you can see, we're going in order of more difficulty. This is our character. So it's called Char for short. It's 4-letter abbreviation. And it's used to store single characters. So these are numbers or letters. Any keystroke on your keyboard you can store inside of a character, but you can only store one. And also there's a special way to store them. You have to, when assigning a character to a char variable, you have to put the character in single quotes. So I'll show you what that looks like. So if we go down here, and then we go back up, we're going to create a variable, a char variable, a character. That's official name. So it's CHAR. It's supposed to be lowercase. The C is going to be lowercase here. Just remember to keep this syntax in mind. And we're going to name it, let's name it letter. That's the name of our variable. It's called letter. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be assigning, just make sure that it's a lowercase c for your char when you're declaring it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our variable letter. We're going to set it equal to any letter that we want. Now, it doesn't have to be a letter. You can set it equal to any keystroke. It can be a number, a letter, any character on your keyboard, but it can only be one. But we'll use a letter for an example, just to change things up. So the only unique way when it comes to storing characters is whatever letter or character that you want to store, you have to put it within single quotes when assigning it to a character variable. So we're going to put our letter A within single quotes, and then we're going to close it off with a semicolon. We'll take our previous system.out.println function. I just copy and pasted it back, and we're going to print out our variable letter. This is just to prove again that we did successfully store the letter A in our variable letter. So if we go back up to the top left, we hit that big green play button. As you can see, our console is loading, and at the very bottom of our console, we did successfully store the value A, the character A, in our variable letter. Now onto our fourth variable type. This one's a little bit more complicated than a character. However, it's more commonly used than a character. So this is called a string variable. It's used to not only store one character type, so any keystroke on your keyboard, you can store a sequence of characters. So you can store as many as you want. So that can be a single character or more than just one. So it has more capacity than a character, so it's more often used. So it's most often used for words, sentences, phrases, anything with more than just one set of characters. When assigning a string, the only difference is you have to put the sequence of characters that you actually want to store within the string. You have to put it in double quotes, kind of like we did with single quotes for a character, except you'd put it in double quotes. So let's go up to the top and let's create a string variable. And as you can see here, I'm creating my variables, but I'm entering them every time that I create a new variable. It just makes it more organized. That's proper Java etiquette. So we'll put our string variable here, and it's going to be a capital S. As you can see here, it's a capital S string. That's the proper syntax, proper way of declaring it. Everything's case sensitive in Java, so make aware of that. We're going to call it phrase, the name of our variable. So we declared our string variable here, and we named it phrase. Now we're going to go back into our notes, our code, and we are going to type in our phrase variable name. So phrase, this is our string variable name, and we're going to set it equal to whatever phrase that we want. So let's set it equal to a common phrase in Java just to test out whether or not your computer is responding. You would oftentimes write the expression hello world. And remember, we put that in double quotes, and we're just going to end it off with a semicolon at the end. Now that we have created our variable here, we're going to do the same thing as we did with our other variable types. We're just going to print it out to our console using the sysout statements. It's sysout for short, but it's called system.out.println in full. So we'll type in our variable name inside the parentheses, and then we'll just hit play to see if we successfully store the expression the phrase hello world inside of our variable. So we hit play. Oops. As you can see here at the very bottom, we did successfully store the phrase hello world in our variable. Now for the very final variable type, we have something called a Boolean. A Boolean is a little bit more complicated than our other variables. It's used in more advanced Java, but I'll give you a basic example of it. So a Boolean is basically used to store whether or not a single variable, it's literally called Boolean, just as it's written. It holds the assignment of true or false. So essentially the only value that it's going to hold is true or false. That's it. So it often starts with the word is and the validating name afterwards. So say, for example, if you're trying to validate whether a sequence of numbers are prime or composite, you would name the variable, this Boolean variable, you would name it is prime. And then essentially what you would do is you would assign it whether or not it's true or whether or not that value is false. And that Boolean variable will hold that assignment of true or false throughout the program unless you change it. So I'll show you what that looks like here in terms of declaring it. Not as commonly used in basic Java programming, so don't be worried if you don't understand it. So we see here Boolean. We'll type in Boolean here. And then we're going to call our Boolean some sort of condition. We'll call is prime. This is often used with programs if we're trying to find if a number is prime or not. So what we can do is we created our variable is prime at the top. We declared it right here, is prime. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back down here. We're going to set that variable is prime. We're going to assign it whether or not it is true or false. So we can just type out the regular word, true or false. So I'm going to type in true. You don't have to put it in double quotes. Nothing is required around it. It can just put the raw word true or false. And now we can see if we successfully store the value of true within our Boolean variable. So we're just going to print out this variable is prime. And let's go hit that green play button. So as you can see here at the very bottom of our console, we did successfully store the value true in our Boolean variable is prime. All right, everyone. So thank you all for joining us for this lesson here. I really appreciated, all of the support that we received on the channel so far. But please continue to help support us here at eCoreAcademy by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment down below. It's very encouraging for us to keep making these videos for you. So thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next lesson.